this talk together, I was hearing this song by Casey Musgrave, and Andrés has really been out in the rain, catching lightning for all of us, and I think we're really grateful to him for that, because it's been a real endeavor, and he's taken a lot of arrows and bullets for us over the years. So please join me in welcoming my friend Andrés Duany.
I wasn't afraid of what Dira would say. I was just afraid he would set the agenda about what I had to speak about, which happened a bit last time with Dan's an extraordinarily kind lecture. I was also slightly afraid that we were becoming a little too Italian. If you've been to an Italian conference, the professors all introduce each other and then dispense with the lectures and go have coffee, which is at least one of the models I would like to propose for CNU. In which people come up here, you say who you are, and then go off and really meet the people you want to speak to. There's a little bit of that going on after this, in which we're all going to get together and discuss. And what I really wanted to do today was actually to set the agenda, at least for the next 3 hours. And the reason is that the CNU is best as a collective, and not just a collective of we do the codes and you do the architecture or vice versa. It's a collective of thinking and of rigor. In a board meeting recently, there was a kind of discussion, and I realized, the CNU is 20 years old. This is the first of the third decade, and this is 10 times more than CIAM met, twice as many times. It's 10 times more than Jose Luis Sert's meetings at Harvard that actually took place in the 60s and actually invented urban design. So we've been going at it twice as long as both of the great organizations of the 20th century that pivoted the direction of urbanism. And just at least for resilience, we should get applause. I'm going to speak a little bit about the resiliency of this organization, and the board was discussing it recently, and their theories about why it is that what kind of an organization we are, and the answer is always all of the above. What we are is a really fluky organization. It's always on the verge of collapse, irrelevancy, but it actually just pulls through. When you see the faces of your fellow members, you say, now I remember. This is why I come here. Everybody else is on a flat line. And you remember, and by the way, you should go to APA conferences, National Association of Home Builders conferences, and ULI conferences just to remember how different this is. Because anyway. I'm supposed to be nice today. One of the things that also came up in one of the recent meetings is that there's a myth that also the 5 founders, which actually are more like 7 or 8 founders or 10 founders, is historically, we used to fight a lot, that we didn't get along. And people who think that are people who weren't there. What we were actually doing is discussing principle vehemently. Things had to be worked out about the organization. And it was brought up a board meeting after board meeting after board meeting after board meeting, and almost never decided. It's the nature of the organization. But it was always about substance, and we always remained friends. All the people that were just having it out for years became friends. And people looking at it from the outside said, how could this possibly be that these people are friends? But it was always a contest of ideas. It wasn't about territory. It was about ideas. And one of the ideas, which I think is terribly important, and I could actually, it wouldn't hurt to actually list a few of them sometime, not today, what some of the ideas that were debated and how they came out, was early on, as someone actually managed to say the other day, is the origins of the CNU was to actually maintain standards. If you look at the invitation of the first Congress, we said, look, this thing works. The only way this can fail is if it goes through the usual process of American cultural degradation and it becomes a cartoon of itself. It becomes commercialized. Exactly what happened to modern architecture. Exactly what happened to classical architecture. Exactly what happened to, one might say, democratic government, in which it's become either dysfunctional or something pretty close to the mob scene, which charrettes have become. Everything degenerates in this system, and we said if we establish standards, we would. And I was for establishing standards very, very strongly. And Dan Solomon was absolutely against it. And we went at it and at it and at it. And as recently as 4 years ago, I very unkindly went up to Dan, and I said, Dan, do you realize that if we had gone my way, we would now be LEED? We would be the USGBC. Because we were 15 years ahead on establishing standards. We had the technology, we had the model, all we needed to do was establish standards and establish protocols. That was 3 years ago, and now I say, thank you, Dan. Thank you so much, because what's happened is that LEED, while powerful, has become a dinosaur. It can barely move. You want a new LEED? Protocol? I heard of one the other day. It says, we need a new LEED protocol for this kind of project. LEED says, well, that'll be $16 million to work out the standard. Like, who wants to belong to that organization? You might as well go get a paycheck somewhere. It's it's driven by automatic protocols. It's driven by endless meetings. It's driven by actually superb financial performance for itself. But it's not the kind of organization we are. It's a heavy armored division, and we have always been light cavalry. And by the way, in case we forget what light cavalry is, we have tactical urbanism to remind us, which is even lighter. And that could only have happened within the CNU. And I'm going to speak extensively about where the next generation is going and how it's coalescing and how close it is to our own origins and how much we need it. So thank you, Dan, for at least paralyzing my argument. And by the way, nobody ever wins or loses. It just happens both ways, in the CNU. It's that kind of organization. And that kind of organization has been identified in a recent book, and I forget the name of the book, but the basic idea is that it's the nature of a protean organization. A protean organization Proteus is the god of the sea. And the sea has depth and substance and coherence at the center, particularly at the center. The whole center is the sea. And at the edges, it conforms to whatever's happening. It laps up against any type of coast. The tides are different at the edges. So protean organization has an extremely store, and it has a reserve at the center that allows it to lap the edges. Okay, this is different from a networked organization, which is completely neutral, which is so many of the modern organizations are, including, by the way, tactical urbanism. It's extremely decentralized. Some advantages, but some disadvantages, and of course, the centroidal ones of which LEED USGBC is an entirely different model. And it is absolutely desirable to become a protean organization because you have it both ways. And I'm going to actually show what the source of that is. So, one little anecdote more. I couldn't sleep not only because of Diru, but this talk couldn't come together. It didn't come together. Of course, the standard was Dan's talk last year. Like, Dan turns every talk into a work of art. And sometimes it just doesn't come together. It's apples and oranges. And I was worried about trying to make a really elegant talk, and I couldn't. And I walked, this morning I woke up at 5:30. I came down to the lobby of the Peary, and there was Edward Erfurt sitting like a Buddha on a little chair with a computer. Ignored. I said, "Hello, Edward, nice to see you." And he says, "Why are you up early?" He says, and I said, "Well, I'm up early because I can't sleep, because I'm worried, because I do not believe that this talk comes together. I don't think by nature it comes together." And Edward looks up and says, "Good, we need that." That's meeting Buddha on the road. And Liz will know, because I left the room in a high state of anxiety, and the next time she said, it says, "What's up with you? What pill have you taken?" And what happened is that, the stress of actually making an elegant presentation totally disappeared. So, but you might enjoy it. Anyway, what I wanted to do is to, by the way, this presentation is going to happen twice, because there's no way you're going to look at me speaking and look at that, okay? And anybody who's a speaker knows that you can't present this way. We have to be in the same cone of vision, and actually Richard Love's talk, among the several reasons it was very good, is that he didn't have slides. And when you're standing up here looking at you, and you see you're pointing over there, and everybody's looking at my face, it's very disconcerting. You say, this thing isn't working. It isn't working. And just please, in the future, just put the slide in the same cone of vision as the speaker. So I'm now going to go very quickly over what the themes are so you can concentrate on them. Then I'll show you the images later, like a bad book, okay? Like the treatises of classical architecture, in which they had the text in one place and the images somewhere else. Okay, this third decade, one of the things that we have to, there's a lot of self-criticism in the new urbanism, and there's very, if that's convenient, given a circumstance somewhere, go ahead and self-criticize, call yourself what you wish. But part of our single biggest problem is that we've prevailed. We've actually become the paradigm. They may not be new urbanists, such as some planning firms, but the discussion is on the basis of new urbanism. They say, who are we? We do not do form-based codes. That's who we are. Who are you? Well, we don't do new urbanism completely. We're new urbanism light. So they define themselves. That's what a paradigm is you define yourself relative to. Emily and I and 15 of you just finished editing a book called Landscape Urbanism and Its Discontents. It came out last week. And it's called Dissimulating the Ecological City. Dissimulating the Sustainable City. And one of the points that's made in that is that the academy, i.e. Harvard, defines itself. Landscape urbanism is an extraordinary collection of things. It's this and that and the third. And it defines itself. The only coherent way to explain what they are is the things we don't do, both conceptually and formally. Why don't they do grids? Is a grid going to kill you? Oh, well, we can't do grids. Why don't you do codes? Well, we can't do codes. And eventually you figure it out, that in order to establish a new paradigm, even Harvard has to set itself up as not the new urbanism. Okay? Now, the enormous problem with this, and by the way, the book discusses this extraordinarily well, because all the authors stuck to it, just stuck to it, to the topic, and that's always very effective, the different points of view. That comes from the charter, okay? I'm going to show you slides of probably 7 lineal feet of books written by the new urbanists. The landscape urbanism has, I believe, something like 5 inches. We have 7 feet of books. We're right up there with, there are more books on us by us and on us than on CM. And I'm talking about people who talk about the new urbanism, not the tangential smart growth stuff. Talk about the new urbanism. And none of them were vetted. None of them even thought of getting approval to do the book or to say it was a new urbanist book or to use the term or to use the brand or anything else. None of them did it. They were at the edges. The books are written specialized to reach the different shores. They're in Cuba, they've been stolen in China, reproduced everywhere. They're capitalist, they're communist books, everything you like. And it's the charter at the center. That's the god Proteus at the center. The miraculous charter that you don't have to check what people say because you're not a new urbanist if you don't read the charter. And by the way, you have to be a very weird person to read the charter and say, I don't believe in this. That's the nature of that document. It really screws with your head. You really begin to see the world that way. And that's the great thing about the charter. Emily wrote a book, probably 4 books ago. She does about 2 a year. One of the more interesting histories of urban planning that says essentially the new urbanism is the permanent condition in American planning. It's not a long history of planning, but he says it has oscillated from top down, do whatever you like, from bottom up to top down. You know, the Puritans did this, you know, the 9 Squares of New Orleans, up and down, up and down. It oscillates. Moses is up here, Jane Jacobs is down here. And he says, and of course there's advantages and disadvantages to both. You know, Moses is efficient, he can build a big infrastructure, but he ruins neighborhoods. And then Jane Jacobs does, but you can't get anything done with Jane Jacobs because every principle is open, it's extremely inefficient, etc. But she says the new urbanism has both. It's both intrinsically bottom up and top down. And she says it's the charter, which is top down, and the charrette, which is bottom up. But it isn't the kind of charrette, and we never come in and say, hey, I don't know anything, what would you like to do? You know, if a new urbanist is hired, it's on the basis of the charter already. So it's a basis of discussion relative to the charter. So there's a bottom up and a top down. So the new urbanism is the charter and the charrette, the principle and the process. And that has never been combined before, explicitly and theoretically. And she says that this is the permanent condition. It's one of these fundamentals. And this is in one of her books. So the charter is central, as is the charrette. Now that doesn't mean that we don't tinker with them in this new century. And that's one of the themes that I want to speak about. So we're doing really well. Okay, you know, we wanted to do a magazine years ago, not too many years ago. And then have you ever seen, and somebody said, have you seen Urban Land lately? Urban Land being the magazine of the ULI. It's new urbanism 90% of the time, including the cover. Like, why do we need, you know, our own magazine when Urban Land is doing such a nice job? And the APA with its form-based code initiatives and so forth. And this is the virus theory. The virus theory is that we forge the ideas by our nature, the way we are, the way we meet, the way we treat each other, and so forth. We forge the ideas, and then people take them up. And when they take them up, they get credit for it. They absolutely get credit. You know, Brookings gets credit, they get credit. And that's the idea. The idea is so much more effective. We do the cool, interesting stuff, and they're the people that have to go out to the masses, you know, and figure out how to do it. Now, they also happen to get funding and grants, you know, but it's our ideas. And it's going to be very, very difficult to actually take on the large grants, the large organization, the incredible credibility, and also the bad taste, the very bad form of actually saying, no, that's our credit, we said that first. You know, we said that first. Those are our words. You know, that's not the way we work. You know, we do it as anonymously as possible. I think the best presentation is, and you'll see me do it a couple of times today, is I don't say, hey, this is new. I just say, hey, you haven't heard? Haven't you heard that this is what people are doing? And there's a nature of the, you know, that's a very, very sophisticated polemic. It's the polemic of the virus. It worked really well. I'll show you a diagram until one thing happened. We did not know, frankly, that we knew that the greatest beast that we had to enter as a virus was the environmental movement. We knew that that was the 21st century. We didn't know how technocratic that beast would become. We did not understand how the presentation of that beast would become so based on penance, on the humans being the problem, and on dwindling the humans. So we entered a beast that actually, at least I feel, is incompatible with our ethos. You know, and so there's a problem. One of the problems is that the virus is now inside the beast. And the problem is not that we know we're inside the beast, is that there was no membrane. Okay? So we entered the beast, but unfortunately the beast is affecting the virus. And we are becoming virtually, we may become, if we don't watch it, virtually indistinguishable from 1,000 other environmental organizations. And the world doesn't need 1,001. And it doesn't need us to take on other people's agendas when they're already well covered and well funded. We do what we do. We do what we do well, and no one else is doing it. And insofar as we don't have a membrane, then we become like them, and actually, finally, we achieve irrelevance. Because we're not necessary, we're not different. So I would say that one of the things that we should be careful for, now that we're inside the beast, is to maintain that membrane. And I'm going to show you a diagram of how that beautiful plan actually ended badly, or potentially ended badly. What the CNU does is take a deformation of the American environmental movement that prevents it from succeeding and completes it in such a way that it can succeed. Now, bear with me a little bit, because this is hugely important. It has been to me. About 10 years ago, Ann Daigle sent me a lecture by William Cronin, the professor at Madison who was the keynote speaker 3 years ago, if you remember. And it was a collection of essays, and he was very worried about the American environmental movement. And one of the premises of that book, was that the American environmental movement, and by the way, environmental movements essentially arose at the turn in the 1900s. Right? You know, from the 19th to the 20th century. At first it was romantic. You know, the Germans, everybody romanticized nature. The Hudson River School, you know, isn't nature beautiful? It'll make us healthy. It'll make us virtuous. And then it became scientific. And that occurred about 1900, both here and in Europe. In Europe, there was virtually no wilderness left. And so the European environmental movement, and by the way, what's the name of that Australian environmentalist? I must give him credit. The man who died a few years ago. George? Seddon. Okay. George Seddon was a kind of Ian McHarg in Australia, except with one difference, is that all his books included humans in them. They never stopped with this is the shoreline, and this is the oyster, and this is the bird that eats the oyster, but it's also this is the human that looks at the bird. You see? And humans have a right to look at the birds. Therefore, they have a right to be in the beach, just like the oyster and the pelican and everybody else. He just never stopped. His books are very unusual because they could be like Ian McHarg, but he actually has a proposition about how to live in nature. And I was introduced to him working in Perth, and I said, what's up with this? How can you do this? Like, this is so odd, it includes us. And he says, oh yeah, the American environmental movement's crazy. It's the only environmental movement in the world that doesn't include humans. And then, you know, I said, incredibly interesting, but it was explained to me by, eventually when I read Cronin later, thanks to Ann Daigle, and what happened was the American environmental movement was born of the national park system, which was about the protection of wilderness, you know, Yellowstone and those valleys in the West. And when the ideal is the protection of wilderness, the human degrades the ideal. So you get the wilderness looking good, as it always does, working well, as it always does, even if a little scary. First human walks in, and the ideal is degraded. 2 humans walk in, it's degraded further. 10 humans walk in, it's degraded further. And then you get, of course, 1,000 humans, and it's a problem, and you need to start fencing it out, and no roads, no this, no that, no hunters, no nothing, no dogs, no. That definition of the humans being outside of nature yields such draconian laws as never can you build in a riparian corridor. So there's a stream, and it's got all this mucky stuff on the side, which is healthy environmentalism. And we say, yes, that's fine, but we're building a city here. And we'd like to reward the people who live in this city, who are living densely, by being able to approach the stream or the river with an embankment. You know, the way they do in Paris and London and Florence and every city that's worth living in, and people are willingly living densely and walking and taking transit. You reward them by having them approach the city. The American environmental movement says, no, there's one setting, and it's 60 yards from wherever the center line or the riparian edge. There's one setting. Well, you can't do that in Europe. We also write a completely stupid rule that says, oh, well, you can't build on the hillsides. I said, well, I technically can build on the hillsides. No, you can't build on the hillsides. Why? Well, you degrade nature. No, what you're doing is you think it's ugly. That's the problem. You think that if a human builds on the hillside, you think it's ugly. Now, no European could ever write that, because when the environmental movement arrived in Europe, there were actually Italian hill towns. And when you look at an Italian hill town and you look at a bare Italian hill, the hill town actually looks better than the hill. So you can't make the argument, it's absurd. And then there are beautiful villages in German forests, so you can't say don't ever even touch the forest with a house. Because there are beautiful villages in German forests, so you can't, you just couldn't make the argument in Europe because humanity was already, there was no pure wilderness. So you couldn't make the argument, but we had pure wilderness. And in the establishment of wilderness as the ideal, emerged a conflict between the human and the natural, which has been unresolved to this day. And how does the resolution manifest itself? 3 ways. Okay? The first one is that our metrics don't count. Okay? The environmentalists write metrics that say, oh, pavement, bad. Let's take Times Square. Times Square, very dense, very attractive to people, all paved, 4 trees, huge heat island. Shining lights to the heavens. I don't know why that's bad exactly, but it's bad. Okay, shining lights to the heavens. So the environmentalists say, when you propose, say, let me build a Times Square here, they say, no, that's horrible. Are you kidding? Look at that, 100% pavement, 58 tons of trash a day. The ecological footprint's a disaster per square foot. We're still fighting that thing. And by the way, it's lighting up the heavens and all this stuff. They don't understand that the 6 million people a year who visit there, willingly, because they love it, are not bothering the bears in Yellowstone. Because it's two different ways of thinking. So what they do is, American environmentalism is prophylactic. What we say, oh, we're going to put a line around this wilderness. Don't come in, no roads, nothing. So it's prophylactic. The human is the problem. The new urbanist proposition is and has always been, we will make places to live that are dense, walkable, and diverse, so attractive that people wouldn't want to live elsewhere. That has always been the proposition. It's not about coercion. It's not about the urban boundary. It's just stupid to live out there. Why would you want to live out there unless you're poor or stupid? I mean, that's the new urbanist proposition. Right? Because this stuff makes so much more sense. And that's the case we make. It's actually brilliant. We do very little of don't move out. There's a little bit too much urban boundary stuff, which never holds anyway. We should learn a little history, by the way. But it's all about allow us to make places that are really, really, really great that people love. So we go to Pienza. The Seaside Institute goes to Pienza. Every year the Seaside Institute goes to Pienza. Every year it's stunningly lovely. Every year it's still only 14 acres. Every year there's still only 2 trees in all of Pienza. And then there are people writing, ordinances for trees and so forth. And then the landscape urbanists at Harvard do not allow the making of anything that doesn't either is induced or reserved as natural implants. Whatever you do, see that intersection? It's better if you turn it into a mini wetland. But sir, it doesn't connect to the actual wetland out there. There's no. And by the way, nature actually doesn't care that much whether the rain enters the aquifer here or a mile down. And that little pipe actually doesn't hurt the little HO2 molecule. But there's this absolute theology that everything must be greened, So what's the beef we have with landscape urbanism? They don't let us build cities. And the thing is that they're smart enough to have gone directly to, because of biophilia, which is the visuals of being green, which are so seductive. They present environmentalism with visuals. They present their metrics as if they were religious texts to be worshipped. You know what we do when we get a metrics from a report? We say, oh yeah, thank you very much. Here's your $20,000, and we follow the rules. we do not celebrate the metrics of green. We do not celebrate how green we are. We do not polemicize the visual green. But in polemicizing the visual greens, bless them. We love it, so clever, we can't build Charleston again. And I've always said, when I looked at Lead ND, I said, look, I don't have to read I know every single line makes sense here. But if you can't build Charleston, I'm not interested. There's one test. It's an objective test. Will this allow me to build Charleston? Okay, I don't care what the metrics are. I don't care the mumbo jumbo. I don't care how powerful. I don't care what a great new step it is. If I can't build Charleston, after having spent 20 years learning how to build Charleston and seeing how happy the humans are living in Charleston, I cannot condone any document that doesn't allow me to build Charleston. And that's the test. Because Charleston is entirely benevolent. As long as you have a comprehensive attitude that environmentalism includes people who love living in density and thereby leave nature alone because they wish to live in the beauty. And you cannot achieve the extraordinary reward of street life, which is what compensates for not having a backyard, not having a car, and not having a big apartment. If you're not going to give them a big house and a car immediately adjacent and a backyard, you had better give them street life. And street life has never been achieved by landscape urbanists except by Photoshop. It's the truth. So this is a crisis, okay? And if you don't believe in street life, go to Kentlands, go to Seaside, they're mobbed. They're absolutely mobbed. And by the way, if you think it doesn't work, the problem we have is the prices, no shack remains ungentrified. No shack remains inexpensive because there's too little of it still. It's not our fault that new urbanism becomes expensive. So there we are. We have a situation in which environmentalism they have all the metrics to say we're the most important thing that ever happened or will happen because we know about climate change. We have all the metrics. They have enormous bureaucracies at every possible level. United Nations bureaucracies, national bureaucracies, federal, state bureaucracies. There are 6, 7 people looking at water quality in Florida alone. Okay, 6, 7 agencies. Everybody's looking. Every little beach mouse in Florida is independently studied genetically and is considered a rare species. And any beach mouse can trump a bike path. I am not kidding. Okay, right now in Perdido Key, look it up. A beach mouse, which actually is exactly like every other beach mouse, except it isn't. As they say, here's the trick. This says, well, it's locally widespread, but nationally rare. Well, nice trick. Of course, there's only very few Florida white beach mouse because they're all in Florida. If you divide it nationally, there are not that many. But here in Perdido Key, you step on them. So, it's a cute thing. It's a really cute beach mouse. But unfortunately, we're trying to build a bike path, and we can't. So there's something wrong with this. They have no tools to accommodate humans, but they're very, very powerful. Now, you'll notice this that's extraordinary. They have all the metrics. They have enormous bureaucracies, and they're always on the defensive. American environmentalism is both the overlord and the underdog. It's always in retreat. Like, have you noticed that extraordinary phenomenon? It's not in retreat in Europe. It's in retreat here. It's always in retreat, no matter how powerful it is. The reason is that it only has half the tools. They only have the green tools, the tools of nature. And until the humans are folded into the system, it isn't going to work. What is the one organization that knows how to do that? The CNU. Okay? So the membrane has to work that way. But insofar as we take on their agendas, insofar as we overmuch actually believe that the raindrop has to actually fall right through where it lands, we distort our own power. We have to be very careful. Okay? And now I don't think this idea is going to die because environmentalism is not going to succeed until somebody does this. until somebody actually achieves that synthesis in which the environment includes humans. Humans are within nature, so it might not be the CNU if we blow it, but it's going to be somebody. And I'd much prefer that it be the CNU in the next 10 years instead of some other organization that will have to escape from this one to do it. So, I am now going to show you the slides in the manner, and I'm going to introduce I'm going to introduce this through the Mormon experience of the city of Zion. And it is, new urbanists study success wherever it occurs. And new urbanists also have a series of belief systems, like, for example, the small block is better. The small block is great. If you've been to Portland, we know the small block is great. Therefore, the City of Zion block of Salt Lake City and of the Latter-day Saints, the LDS, is bad. We all came here knowing that this is the worst city we know. Okay? Although sometimes, I think Austin is a little bit in competition. Look, let me put it this way. 200 bars isn't urbanism. It isn't just the counting pedestrians, it's what they're doing. Where was I? So I'm going to present two things. I'm going to present today our adored Portland and then our reviled Salt Lake City. And actually, I think I'm making a very strong case that we need both. And not only do we need both, but actually Salt Lake City may actually have many more lessons than the others. And one of the reasons is actually the spectacular success of Salt Lake City. In 100 years, the LDS built 736 towns and cities in 100 years. And in a 50-year period, they built 530 in the 19th century. How many Portlands are there? How many cities with 200 by 200 square foot blocks are there? You know what? Not even Portland. Not even Portland is 200 by 200. You have to search for the 200 by 200. So we know its virtues in theory, but in reality, the virtues of this one. Now the confusion is that the present Salt Lake City is not what Joseph Smith and Brigham Young had in mind. That's the problem. Their membrane, the membrane that was so beautifully set, actually was infected by suburban sprawl and certain capitalist protocols of the worst kind, of absolutely real estate as basically, land as a real estate asset. And so what you see here is not what was intended. Again, I need to make, with all due respect, the originators, the prophets, the Brigham Youngs are the ones we should listen. The reason we know this is that when we were asked here by LDS, to look at their land to see whether the outcome could be different, we actually began looking at the documents really, really closely. And we drew from them. We literally drew from them. And then we went to the museum, which you must go see, of the Trek of the Mormons and see what's up. And we saw the model of the early Salt Lake City. And we saw what was intended. And what was intended was not the most brutal public realm in the Southwest. It was actually the gentlest, most ecological grid ever conceived. It's exactly the opposite of what was intended. And you can see it in the model. I have a slide here. I hope it shows that. There's also something that was incredibly important about the Mormon experience. Brigham Young, whatever his otherworldly virtues, was a management genius. He was the Henry Ford of urbanism. Okay, no one set it up to build 500 or 700 cities. Not the British Empire, not the Romans, not Stalin. Nobody did that. Nobody did it. And he didn't do it with centralization. He did it as a subsidiarity. He made the decisions that had to be made, and then there was a protocol by which people on the site could make the decisions all the way down. Okay? And we misread that too. We say it was always the same grid. It's always this, it's always that. No. there was actually decision-making throughout, all the way down. And subsidiarity is very important to us, particularly because of the public process and the difficulties we're having. So I want to bring that up. I also want to bring up Portland for its virtues in another regard. There's something called the successional urbanism, which is very well known in environmentalism. You know, first you seed the grasses, and then you get brush, and then you get, you know, young forest, then you get climate forest. Nature doesn't spring up as climate forest. You know, New York City did not begin with 100-story buildings. New York City began as a shanty town, as a Dutch shanty town, exactly like the ones in Venezuela. Okay, you know, with filth on the street, pigs everywhere, you know, you name it. And then it was rebuilt as little brick houses, and then it was rebuilt as brick townhouses, and then it was rebuilt as stone 20-story commercial buildings, and then it was rebuilt as 100-story glass buildings, successionally, on the same chassis. It was successional. The problem with the new urbanism in the last 10 years is that we were bitten by the bug of financial protocols by accountants. And not Seaside and not the early projects, but we always pitched the climax condition. We designed, thoughtlessly, 4-story buildings. Right from the beginning. Oh, the town center? Well, that's 4 to 8 stories. And we will then, and we know it's shops on the first floor, and then 4 stories, and that's your town center. Well, you know, we could do that when the bigger the deal, the financial deal, the better. You could only fund big deals. Nobody wanted to do little deals. So pitching the climax condition was possible. Try to do that now. We're back to normal. Many small deals instead of one big deal, and also successional. Because what happened is, you know, the Steve Hall building at Seaside, which is 70 feet wide, cost $13 million 20 years ago, which means it costs $26 million now. Okay? If you were going to build a 4-story town center by the 100-foot, it's a $15 million loan, and another $15 million loan, and another $15 million. You know you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it in the lifetime of your residents. They will grow up, go to college, and their kids will grow up before you get the town center. And that's unfair. We absolutely need to deliver town centers at the beginning. And what's the protocol? The inaugural condition, this single-story town center, which, by the way, persists in many places as some of the very nice ones. When I was in Portland, I have a habit of going to a place and say, show me the coolest place. You know, just, it has to be a pretty cool person, actually, that you ask that to. Don't try it with the wrong person. So you find a cool person and you say, send me to the coolest place. 10 years ago, Michael Mahaffey took me to the Pearl District in Portland. And it was, you know, the mixed-use high-rises looking good, you know, glassy, you know, our own Vancouver. 3 years ago, he took me up the hill to a place on, I think, 20th Avenue and 20th Street, something like that. And I was in the original Portland grid of 1870, among the original Portland buildings of 1870. And they were single-story stores and 3-story walk-up apartment buildings. It was mixed use, not on top, which is expensive, but mixed use, which is beside, without the sprinklers, without the fire stairs, without the complexities. Still statistically mixed use. All the parking was on street, because the Portland block delivers a lot of parking right on the perimeter, because it's a very high perimeter, so you don't have to build a second parking lot. And I was looking at it, and I said, completely delightful. All the businesses are cooler because it's cheaper. You can still build this, and this is what the town centers have to be. And then I remembered, that's what they were at Seaside. That's how we started. Everything of the new urbanism in its first decade was incubated, you know? And actually, I'm looking at above here, and Mashpee Commons was single-story also. They're incubated as single-story, then it goes on. That's successional urbanism. We have to remember that. Okay, we have to restore that, and we need words for that, because it's all about being lean again, because this century is different than the last one. The last century finally stopped. There's also a terrific bias everywhere for high-tech solutions to green. They'll fail. They're too expensive. And my essay in Diru's book was the following. You know, Seaside has an extraordinarily complete and well-executed agenda of green solutions, of modern green solutions, right now. you know, the native species, the permeable pavement, the sustainable urban drainage, you know, the reflective roofs, you know, the walkability. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic how well it did. Do you know why we did that? Because it was cheaper. Do you think in 1980 we were thinking, you know, 1980 was not 1960, okay? What was happening is it was a recession, and Robert was saying we have to be smart, because I did 2 projects and we didn't make any money, you know, and I'm not going to follow the protocols, you know, because, you know, the bank made money, but I didn't. This is my 3rd project, and we're going to do it differently. We're going to keep debt low. And the debt drove us to environmental solutions. So when I hear this little talk about environmentalism costs more, but don't worry, it pays for itself over 8 years, or don't worry this, or don't worry that, and you know, we need to have checks on no atom. You know, yes, I know the window costs $1,000, but you realize that no atom of oxygen or carbon will ever escape. What you're talking about? You know, okay, I want to set, everybody's on the same boat. Everybody's an environmentalist, and everybody, unknown to them, is utterly biased to high tech and zero carbon and everything else, and that is going to crash. Okay? It's going to crash, completely going to crash, because you can't afford it. Britain, with its zero carbon by 2016, has backpedaled completely. Of course you can't do that. You know, of course everybody who builds a zero you know, a house in which has to be tested as if it were a submarine. You know, of course that's not going to happen. Like, what are you talking about? Of course you can't amortize this stuff. It's going to break before it amortizes. Of course I'm not going to hire an engineer. I can barely keep my old water heater running. You know, and that costs, you know, $120 at Home Depot. Do you think I'm going to go for that? High-tech environmentalism is going to crash. Steve moves on. One of our foundry members, one of our intellectuals, one of the people that create the seeds, came up with the original green. Okay, and the original green is the future. And when it backlashes, I would dearly like the new urbanism to be there, because we own that. We own the low tech. Okay, and it's going to happen. And so I'd like to put a membrane between all high-tech solutions. I would also like to put another membrane behind anything, and we are complicit in this. Okay, we are the first people that made codes glamorous. Do you realize, you know, what a code writer was like before the new urbanists came along? Do you think anybody as good looking as placemakers would ever be caught dead doing codes? Well, I know Howard, but when he was young, it was great. But you know, it was the least cool of the cool, uncool things. And then the new urbanists came in and said, oh, this is where this is the dashboard, this is the control panel. It's the most purely intellectual of endeavors. And we made it glamorous. But we forgot to say that the original codes were simple. They were incredibly lean. And we have been complicit in allowing them to get fatter and fatter and fatter to the point that they're virtually indistinguishable. And we need to come up with a new generation of codes that actually has a brand. And I'm going to propose that they be called pink codes. And pink being a reference to light red tape, lightening the red tape. By the way, I like terms that are not self-explanatory, because then they ask you, what do you mean? Okay? And then you tell them your version of the story. If it's self-explanatory, they can interpret it themselves. Oh, yeah, well, we know what that is. Well, you know, we know what sustainable is. Well, you don't. May I explain it? No, we know what it is. Don't worry. But pink, hey, what's that? So there's a generation of pink code, and of course they will actually be probably transect-based. Already the first ones are coming out. When I presented the first pink code, which was all very prototypical just 2 weeks ago in a charrette, it was standing ovation. People are so sick of red tape, you can't believe it. It's also making it impossible for three things being made impossible. First of all, no one can work affordably anymore. Okay, you can't deliver affordable anything, which is why public-private partnerships emerged concurrently. You know, we didn't need them before. We haven't needed them for 300 years. Why do we need them now? Because we made them impossible. It's absolutely impossible to gold plate everything. And so we have to invent the patch of the public-private partnership. So we need to go back to the status quo ante, okay, before we actually became complicit in the fat codes. The second reason that fat codes are bad is that you can't amortize small projects. You know, you can't, you know, there are a lot of people who can make a living in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses a year. The permitting is such that you can't amortize 6 houses. Those builders are gone. You have to amortize 100 houses just to amortize what it takes to go through the professional processing of that. We have to restore that. And most important, why are there tactical urbanists? Why are they tactical urbanists? Why are they absolutely necessary, absolutely brilliant? Why has the next gen become tactical? Because they can't get anything done because of the bureaucracy. That's why. And you know what? I remember very well 1980, and I could get things done. Seaside, we were just as young and just as naive and just as everything, but we got Seaside built because the code regime was so light. And what we've done, the new urbanists, we're delivering an intolerable code regime to our next generation, and I think it's our job in the next 10 years to knock it down. And we're the only people that are committing to that. I think that we're the only people clever enough to do that, to actually take on what we partially created because we've been inside the beast. You know, and that's the whole pink code agenda. And I think that could be the last act of the first and second gen of the new urbanism, is to deliver a world where the young can operate. You know, where the young can actually, where the young can inhabit inexpensive real estate without renovating to the point of sprinklers, where the young can just move in without having to hire architects and lawyers and so forth. You know, the way it was, that's all. You know, 1970. And so I think I would set that up as an agenda. Now I'm going to show you the images that go with this. Okay. If you're confused about how different things are, it's because you probably thought the century began in the year 2000. But centuries do not begin when the 00 clicks. The 19th century lasted till 1914, the 18th century lasted till Waterloo, Congress of Vienna, 1816. The 20th century lasted intact till about 2006-07, okay? It just clicked over, and the great wealth, the absurd wealth of the world, and it was going to go on forever. So the real estate bubble is going to go away. We're all saying, you know, people have said, well, the real estate bubble is going away, and you may have noticed that I respond singularly soberly to the news that the real estate bubble is going to go away, because it is going to go away. But what the real estate bubble revealed, and then there's peak oil. Okay, that's the second thing. And peak oil is, some people really look forward to it, some people think it's going to run out, and the next thing that happened is climate change. And this is the consciousness of climate change. It's not climate change. Climate change has been going on for a long time, as we know. It was scientifically identified in 1988. What happened is that Al Gore's film, actually a brilliant propaganda film, pivotal in all ways, alerted the Americans to climate change. This all happened at the same time. Okay, now talk about revelation. It takes a lot to get Americans to listen, to get it. What happened is all these three crises happened at the same time. By the way, the bubble could have happened at any time, peak oil could have happened a century before, and the consciousness of climate change could have happened in 1990. It all happened at once. And so it's the greatest comprehensive crisis that we have that's cultural. And that's when the century changed. It's like 1914. Okay, that happened, and we all felt it. Now, we think it's going to go away because we have fracking, and because we have enormous wind farms, and that because we know that solar power is endlessly available, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we think, but it isn't going to happen. Let me explain why. The real estate bubble, what it revealed, its great service, is it revealed the economic limits of the United States permanently. You see, what it revealed is that we're broke. Every city, even this city is unique in only being, in not yet being broke. I asked about this the other day, because they're very fiscally conservative. But you know, the pensions, the aging baby boomers, the new medical system, we don't have any money to throw around. We're back to 1870, with the Mormons when there was no money to throw around. In fact, there was no money at all, let alone to throw around. Peak oil, fracking, don't worry about it. Hydrology, atomic, isn't that great? No, no. Kunstler can't stop making this case. I have to emphasize this. The energy will never run out. Petroleum will never run out. It's just not ever going to be cheap. That's all, ever again. Because solar isn't cheap, because wind isn't cheap, because fracking, nothing's cheap. Unfortunately, the Europeans thrive on this because they are set up under a different regime, but the great virtue of America, which is that we had this continental nation, actually cannot sustain. We are set up for the warehouse on wheels of Walmart. Everything about the United States that was a virtue now becomes a problem. The distances to do anything become a problem. You know, the short light rails of Brussels, the long light rails of Salt Lake City. And so remember, it's not that energy, you don't have ups and downs, we found more oil than ever before, or no, don't worry, it's going to run out 1950. It doesn't matter. The fact we work with is that it's expensive, okay? And I would like the New Urbanism to make that proposition, so, because that's the only stability we know. Whether they find or lose other energy, other people can take care of that. You know, that's like the stock market, up and down. The stability is that it's expensive. The economic limits are permanent, and for climate change, okay, if you really look at climate change calmly, it's a very, very, very slow motion crash. It's shockingly slow motion. It's like, you know, for our lifetime, get galoshes. You know, get flood insurance. You know, yeah, I'll move inland. Oh, well, you know, the problem is that it's so slow motion. And what happens, which is now, is that it casts a pall immediately. There's a pall that we've lost the war with nature, that somehow the adversarial relationship has happened. We have to work with the demoralization that increasingly comes when we hit one pivot, one threshold after another. And you say, you know, there was one the other day, 400 parts per thousand per million of carbon. Oh, that's the threshold, the tipping point. We're going to be hitting one tipping point after another, after another, after another. All the poster childs, the Norways, the this, the that, not good enough. Performance is not what we thought. There's going to be a rolling problem. Now, every day we'll go out and the sun will be there and the flood won't be there, but we're going to be really depressed. So we have to pull them out of it, because what happens is when the people are depressed, they basically lose their idealism. And the New Urbanism, and this is in Kunstler's first book, The Long Emergency, we can actually turn all of these problems into a virtue. Okay? The virtue of opening a window, you know, the virtue of beautiful sweaters, or the virtue of porches and ceiling fans, or the virtue of walking to things, or the virtue of localized agriculture. We can turn this into virtues and pleasures and joys and meaningful things if we don't get infected with the pall. Okay? And we've never been infected with a pall before, and we're in great danger of being infected, and we'll become like everybody else. And the people I know are no longer, even the people who believe in climate change are not listening. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed? Do you think that by upping the statistics, they're going to listen more? No. They're giving up. They're buying bigger trucks. The big houses are back because it's going down the tubes anyway. Okay? So we have to say, no, this makes sense. Sustainability is actually adapting to the circumstances. And you know, life can be better this way. It used to be. And by the way, I think a lot of people in this Mormon county probably fondly think of 1940, because I've read about it, what this was like, you know, in 1940. And really, it's quite compelling. Wallace Stegner's book, called In Mormon County of 1940, is one of the great, and he wasn't a Mormon, he just describes what he saw, and it's one of the utopian descriptions. Wonderful places to live, people getting along and having a good time, meaningful existences, quite independent of religion. You know, it just makes sense. Every day made sense. And that, I think, is the ideal. So, now, the new urbanism. I'm proposing terms all the time for correction, okay? And I would like, what I'm proposing basically here is that by putting these ideas out and naming them, that there be a collective endeavor that ends up in a book. And the book might be called Lean, okay? Lean, the new urbanism. And it begins with the new century. It describes the protean condition. It introduces the concept of viruses and membranes, which I spoke about. Something I have spoken less about, but the vernacular mind, which is a way of thinking, the way that peasants and poor people have always made virtues out of limits, the vernacular mind. By the way, those of you who are architects, you're hopeless. It's been trained out of you. Only the non-architects can ever have vernacular mind. So when you see a little bit of redneck engineering in Georgia, or some kind of, some of that carpentry that you still find in New England, instead of sticking up your nose like the architects, that's redneck engineering, and that's the future. And I think we should study that. This subsidiarity process, which is decisions being made at the level at which, the lowest level at which is appropriate. Successional growth, interim buildings. Everything is interim, let's face it. You start with a single-story building, you end up with Manhattan. Okay, interim buildings, but let's start. Let's have different levels of code. Let's have abeyance for starting. Let the young people inhabit first. Let them squat after the neighborhood becomes valuable. Then we bring in the codes. Then we bring in the mortgages. Then we bring in the sprinklers. Let's do it the old way. That's how Soho was gentrified. That's how South Beach was gentrified. That's how the left bank of Paris was gentrified in 1870. Okay? Light green technology. Light green. We've got to own light green. Let the others be heavy green. Let the others be platinum and gold. Let them be the heavy metal. Okay? Let them have it. Okay? The pink codes. What are they? Oh, let me tell you. You haven't heard? The pink codes? They're bypasses. I want to say something about pink codes too. Okay. One of the formative guides of the new urbanism was Chris Alexander, who was looking at the early seaside codes, and he says he knew he could have designed seaside out of his, in an envelope. He knew what it should be like. But he said what the new urbanists have contributed is actually the connection to the existing power grid, which is to say the developers and the administrators, the planning departments. He said, and then he said this, which for me were immortal words guiding me. He said, we all know what the appliance is. Let us design the plugs that connect it to the existing power grids. Stop tinkering with the appliance, stop screwing around with this or that little building type, design the plugs that connect to the existing power grids. And because the new urbanist plugs actually connected, because they have that overlay of connecting to the existing planning system, we plugged in very quickly. And now the smart codes, people say, well, the smart code has flaws because it is connected to a flawed system. By the way, a little adjustment we have to make is we have to start doing light green codes, okay? Because light green codes connect to the new power grid, which is the environmental codes. And as you know, there's version 9 of the smart code, which is the classic with the modules. Version 10 is it's the next gen version. It's highly integrated, very high tech. Version 11 will be the codes that connect to the environmental movement. They're going to be our lead code, And then version 12 are going to be the pink codes. And the pink codes, instead of connecting to the existing power grids, I would say, let us design the plugs that bypass the existing power grids. Okay, now we need to do bypass codes. We need to do workarounds. We need to do patches. Because if you connect to the system, you're sunk. You can't do it. You can't get a permit in New England. You can't get a permit in California. You can't get a permit in most places until, sorry, he's trying to get me to stop. You can't get a permit. I might finish. You can't get a permit anywhere, and it just makes things expensive. And then there are the flex buildings, which are the buildings that actually can become and evolve and evolve. And we should own those. And then the pod practices, which are the new kind of practice that has emerged, the new very lean practices, creative practices that have emerged out of this recession. So here we are. Okay, this is the old paradigm. I don't know whether you know this, but the new urban, this is an old drawing, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15. 1900, there was nothing, there was a little bit of environmental movement, no urbanism. This is 1980. Okay, that's 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. Okay, so what happened was, the brilliant thing about the new urbanism is that there were little peaks. There were the UDAs, there were the Calthorpes, there were the Moulin Polyzoides, there were the DPZs, there were the, there were 5, 6 little firms making little peaks. But instead of individualizing ourselves and saying, no, I'm different, we actually pulled it together with the Congress, and we pulled the little firms into a little mountain. And while individually we would have amounted to nothing, through the discipline of writing the charter and belonging to the same organization, we became visible. Okay? No other group has done that since CM. This is the CM genetics. Most architects to this day are presenting themselves as separate. And by the way, the interesting thing about landscape urbanists is that they're very, very smart. They observed our success, and they're creating a movement. They're creating a movement. That's why they're interesting. It's the first group since ours to create a movement 20-something years later, okay? Notice that the environmental movement is actually also continuously rising and rising and rising and rising, okay? We're not really talking, but both of them are emerging together. And then we come to a time in which the environmental movement, we're firmly planted here. The environmental movement, the world doesn't know this, we're equally important, but we're actually being masked by the environmental movement, like that. That's where we are. And the model is that, remember, each of us only has half the tools. The model, 2010 to 2020, is to complete the hill, to actually integrate, and frankly, it's the transect that has to integrate. It's the common language, and social diversity and natural diversity is the exchange. And we need to concentrate on this, and actually getting together seamlessly, and that means technically. And one of the ways we have to do it to be noticed, because we're blanked out, is we have to keep causing trouble for them. Okay, this idea of getting along, you're not noticed, you're obliterated. The new urbanism was noticed by the ITE, it was noticed by the ULI, because we caused them problems. I suggest that the first light green code be called Lead Light Green. Okay, and I suggest that we urge them to sue us. And when they do, we make the case as to why we're necessary. Okay, that's the way to do it. Because to work it from the inside is $16 million. Okay, and we're all too tired for that. So that's an agenda. Now, the extraordinary thing is that our technology, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, this is a point that Kelbo and others have made, is we can present adaptation, which is local. Mitigation is not our job. That's the United Nations, that's the feds, that's the Sierra Club. We can only succeed in this environmental crisis on a local level, and that has to be adaptation. Okay, but adaptation has all the same technology as mitigation. It's just how you explain it. Okay? You can put a solar panel on a roof, and you can say, do this because nature is worthy and that little polar bear cub deserves it. Okay? And that's the ethical argument, which is mitigation, and thereby we will stop the degradation of the client. Now, the smarter people know the Chinese aren't listening to this business, and so they're closing their solar power, their solar panels and all that stuff. But be that as it may, you can install the same power by saying, when the brownouts occur, with this panel, you can bridge it. You can bridge the problem. You know what's happened in Miami? We've had hurricanes. Eventually you understand that it's really unpleasant to live without electricity for two weeks. So people now have generators, but then the generators have noise, so now they have really light windmills. And why do you do it? Why do we have a little light windmill? For the polar bear? Are you kidding? I'm from Florida, okay? And the cruises don't go there, Okay, not even the cruises. So what's the polar bear to me? Oh, but the hurricane, I know that problem. That's very unpleasant, no ice cream. And so you install the thing. So you explain it's the same technical outcome. And listen, mitigation is propelled by 1,000 organizations. Adaptation has actually no friends. In fact, it's in bad odor because it's considered a retreat. It's considered admittal of defeat. But when it becomes clear that adaptation is the only way and that it's equally effective, because it empowers people to do something. You don't have to count on those Chinese. You don't have to count on those Italians. You don't have to count on all those people that aren't cooperating, right? You can do it yourself for your tribe. You can circle the wagons the same way that the Mormons did every night, the same way that when they landed here, they built the square. They circled the wagons, okay? That feeling is visceral. You know, me and my family and my friends and my neighborhood and my city and my region are going to do pretty well. Great feeling, great empowering feeling. Now, if you continually bring up the Chinese, you're done. Yes? Supposed to stop? Okay, now, almost. Shall we have a vote? Okay, who wants me to stop? And I promise not to tell.
Andrés,
Yeah.
you're going to have your own open source session.
What?
You're going to have your own open
I know, look, there isn't a single person on your side. Go away. Look! Look. Look! I swear, I'll stop. Okay. I'm sorry, this is it. This is my only and last keynote ever. It's also my first, please. Okay, next. Smart Code V10, I always do this. Smart Code V10 are the green light codes, and they can be extraordinarily poetic. Look at this. You see this graphics of this night sky? We learned that from the Harvard people. Look at the night sky. Perhaps you don't see it that well. Don't forget Protean, the Protean organization. We have to remain that. It's been very successful. Leave the people alone. Don't defend the brand too much. The charter, central. Look at the books. Look at the New Urbanist books that I told you about. 7 feet of New Urbanist books. And there are more. I already remember ones that I didn't put on this list. And they're wonderful. They're by great authors. Not one of them is vetted because we're an elite organization, right? Because of the kind of arguments we have, because of the kind of purifying rigor that is the source of we can trust our authors to write this. And New Urban News, okay? I want to say something. This has been precious, New Urban News. It's been through a difficult time, like everybody else. We need to revive New Urban News in some form. Okay. Open source. This drawing. Look at all the transects. There's going to be a new transect book. Look at all the transects, all by different firms. Did we protect our drawings? Did Creer protect his drawing? Does UDA protect their drawing? No. Totally open source. If you can't afford, all right? If you can't afford that quality rendering, use it. And by the way, the reason we say copyright is that so you don't copyright it. All our copyrights say copyright use without permission. Okay? Because if not, we've seen our own drawings copyrighted against us. This was Liz's idea. The pod disperses. Look at the beautiful pod all in smart code colors. Look at it. And you know what the recession did? Look at that. Okay, we're all over the map. New firms, wonderful. And you know what's left behind? The green stuff. You know, huge amount of green stuff, but we're all over the ground. This is it in our yard. All over the ground, dispersed, all over this wonderful sort of transect-based colors, and the homogeneous green stuff stays behind. Look at the firms. These firms are really interesting. This is a firm that hibernates. It's all principles, nothing but principles. They hibernate and then they come together. Extremely lean. This firm, very loosely organized, but also centrally organized. Basically, it's an association of talent. You know, the Guild, which is done by Steve Mouzon. Look at this one. You know what Jeff does? Jeff is solo, doesn't even want a secretary. He settles in with his family in a city for 6 months and does the work, and then leaves. Absolutely extraordinary model. And then they're the tactical urbanism, the tactical urbanist practices, which, by the way, in my opinion, we must exist because of the bureaucracy. And let's look at this. This is what they do. This is in Miami, the tactical urbanists. Matt, Kadia, all the tactical urbanists in Miami, finding places and not asking permission and just doing, and then people say, okay, we'll do it, and then we'll withdraw. But we've demonstrated that it's possible. Tactical urbanism. Okay? Mike, Kadia, Matt, and Anthony. Notice a problem. Mike has a slingshot. Okay? They're all aiming in different directions, and not a single weapon has the same caliber. Okay? This is the other model. This is not Protean. This is the model outside. This is all nothing but networking. Look at this model. The CNU. That's Steph. This is Steph, by the way. Did you know that Peter Calthorpe looked like that, and that's Liz? And Ray, the only one that looks the same is Peter Katz. We have very light green codes. Do you know that because of the smart code and the association with Elliott Allen, that he did a regional plan in 4 days for the Mississippi, a regional plan based on GIS, unbelievably light and inexpensive. No one can do this like we can. So these are the light protocols. What has happened to the CNU? Okay, just try to move anything. Try to move an architecture school. Lead ND. That took how many years? Transit Codes Council, FBCI, ITE. Look at that. Heavy armor. We can't move anymore. We can't afford, not even the US can afford a heavy division. 3 schools, the Princess Foundation, the many practices, heavy. Poor Heather, John, and Ellen trying to run that outfit. It can't turn. It cannot turn. We've become a heavy division. But yet we can't go back to becoming tactical. We're too old, and it doesn't use our skills. We can't do this. It's a waste to have Doug Farr do this, okay? It's a waste to have the first and second generation do this, but we can do this. This is the way we were. Now, what's light cavalry? What's a light division? It's a division that can move very, very quickly, feeding the horses, but is highly organized. Okay, it's not shooting every which way, and it knows how to deal with everything. It knows what the heavy armor is. It knows how to deal with bureaucracy. CNU as a light division is what can actually remove the impediments so that the young can practice. Because, is that going to be Liz Moore? We can't do this anymore, and the young shouldn't have to. They should actually be able to operate the way we did. So these are the things. I'm sorry, should have been erased. Salt Lake City, 2013, is that a model? No. Salt Lake City, oh, I'm sorry, I had closed a lot. I know what I'm doing. A lot of closed slides are coming up because I'm working on the wrong. Salt Lake City, 2013, no. Salt Lake City, 1875, yes. Now look closely at this. This is in the museum. Do you realize that the 160-foot right-of-ways are not the harshest in the West, they're the gentlest? Because the paving was opportunistic. It was only where the wheel could be. And the rest was sustainable urban drainage, which was continuous with the lots. Do you realize the absolute subsidiary intelligence of that kind of engineering, in which you overscale the right-of-way, so if necessary it can be wide, depending on the use on either side, the wheels of the cars do it. Absolutely extraordinary and continually adjusting. It's only when the technocratic engineers after the war came in that they pay from end to end. Subsidiarity. 765 cities in 100 years, there's nothing like it, spectacular success. The vernacular mind, you have to go see the Tabernacle. Okay, this was built with bridge building. When I saw this building, I would have bet good money that it was built in 1930. 1930, 1940, it was built 100 years earlier. And it was all vernacular. You see those piers? They're bearing stone. The trusses, they're bridges. The bridge builders built them. The vernacular mind. No Palladio could have done this. And there it is. It's really worth seeing as a phenomenon. And of course, the pink codes. Do you realize that nothing is legal? That the young people are beginning to do this kind of thing because nothing is legal, and it's fabulous, but they do need the brakes to do it, and there are ways to do it. These can be interim buildings and so forth that can go on. the subsidiarity process. With a desk like that, that's the iPad of the Mormons. That little thing they designed, the 500, the 600, the 700, the 1,000 cities, very, very efficiently by having models. These are the drawings that Matt and Scott Douglas of our office did. We analyzed a few dozen of these Mormon cities, and what we found is lean infrastructure everywhere, successional design, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the project that we did just south of here, we found that the block, actually, by only designing the outside, we could give not only buildings to other architects the way we've always done, not only blocks to, and not only the lot dimension to other architects, but we could give the design of the block inside. And what it turns out is that the large block is extraordinarily flexible and democratic. We think it's this fascist big thing. It was meant to be cut down. It was very unconstraining. So it evolves over time to do what must be done. And it can acquire fantastic character. Also, the dimensions that they have are really quasi-mystical. It all adds up to neighborhood structure virtually to the foot. By the way, the 132-foot street, when you subdivide it to 88, 66, et cetera, clicks right into IT practice. Like, what's up with that? So all these dimensions that we say, oh, 132-foot streets is going to kill me, they weren't meant to be what you saw. They can be what you saw, but that's not what they were meant to be. And what they were meant to be is a lesson for everyone, actually. The world worth studying, and of course this wonderful idea that historical concept had of running a competition of what you would do with the block. And here you see pieces of Italy, you can see pieces of Charleston, really great. And for example, in the project that we did in here, just south of here in Saratoga Springs, we could take the big block and actually have extraordinary diversity within it, depending on what society needs. So instead of designing right away from the beginning, even with a code, what is going to go on every lot, you design the absolute minimal structure, and then what you design is who is going to make the decision when. That's the future of subsidiarity. Lean engineering. You know, the people that you see in the movies with John Wayne on those covered wagons, those pieces of engineering going through the desert, they're Mormons. The rest went north. Okay, so this experience is not marginal. It's absolutely central to the American myth and success story. And I think one of the things you do by looking at the museum is actually you basically you reset your opinion of what has actually happened here in Utah. It really is the great American story, and it's engineering all the way, light engineering. Look at this. Paul Crabtree is now going through the old manuals and actually doing the engineering in which you could pick up, you don't need to drill something down for $20,000. You can pick up some soil. My father, who was a 1950s developer, taught me how to pick up mud, do that with it, make mud, make a little mud pile, do like this with the hand. I remember him doing that, doing like this with the hand, getting a little bucket of sand, throwing in the sand, showing me what it felt like when it was just right, what the ratio of sand was, and then putting caliche on. I forget, there's an American word for that, caliche, until it became stable. Okay, and I just remember it was really inexpensive engineering, very durable roads, very ecological. Look at this manual. Look at the hand, teaching you how to do it. Do you think shouldn't we own this? Shouldn't the next step of our wonderful, brilliant engineers is not to fight the IT further. They're coming along. It's just a matter of time. Let us actually rediscover real engineering, where you really calculate, where it's not from the table, and the knowledge that actually allowed these cities in the West to be built without money. The miracle, the good fit, is that they had no money. All they had was smarts, and they had incredible management, which is what we have. We're smart. By the way, I don't want to say what the others have, but money is not helpful. The lean engineering of Light Imprint, this kind of thing. This isn't a marginal book. This is Tom Lowe's book. This isn't marginal. This is the future. This is our version, our rediscovery of how to build in the 21st century. And then these really fast protocols, the green light codes. By the way, most of them are already built into modules of the smart code. We are lean. We just need to relabel it. This, people have asked me, and I just need to spend a minute on this, and it goes like this, okay? Subsidiarity means that the decisions to be made are on this column. What? Look, who wants me to stop?
That's not a fair question.
Why?
Go ahead and finish.
Okay, just don't bug me. That's why I'm facing this way. And these eyeballs in the back of my head. Why don't you look at the slides? Stop looking at me. Subsidiarity works this way, okay? These are the issues to be decided. These are the people to decide them. And it goes the person, the household, the street face, the block, the neighborhood, the municipality, the region, the MPO, whatever you're doing, this is you. This is your charrette. You're here, okay? The blue is you. And then it goes to the state, the country, and the United Nations, okay? So you have all these things. Now, why do charrettes go so badly? Do you really think you can ask people where the new power lines are going to go or the new rail line is going to go when it's their backyard? They're going to say, no, 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 no. Well, you're asking at the wrong level. You don't ask the people that are along the road of along the trajectory of the power line, because you'll never build a solar farm. If you do that, you'll never build them. You'll never ask the property owners. That's a decision at the level of the state. On the other hand, the decision on chickens is a decision at the level of the block. It's not a decision. And the decision on parking, whether you have it or not, is a decision at the level of the block face. And by the way, the color of your house is also at the decision. But you know, the interior of your house and your backyard is at the decision of the household. And we're always getting that wrong. We're always asking at one level. Ever more sophisticated protocols, ever more sophisticated magic. Let's get more people around tables. Let's have shorter, longer charrettes. Let's have more or less tricks. We're just asking the wrong people. So the charrette should be about deciding what needs to be decided, deciding who needs to decide it, and then putting up the issues, so that and then what the charrette does is convenes. The charrette never had the power to decide. It only has the power to convene and to clarify, and it's always convening the wrong people, the wrong level of people. So subsidiarity, among other things, which is an old system and a Mormon system and so forth, has the power to clean up our charrettes. Now, successional development, of course, is as we know, the retrofit and repair. And we have successional development. You know, by the way, this is an intact transect, an aerial photograph of Portland. Look at it. It's a perfect transect, intact. This is the newer stuff, which is denser and lesser all the way, and then to nature. And then what happens is that this used to be cool, but you can't build this anymore without subsidies and public-private partnerships. So we go back to here, which is both earlier and lighter. So we look at that, and we look at and by the way, here's one of the many illustrations that are available, in that the transect is not only geographic, as you enter the city from edge to center, it's also successional in terms of time. This is after this, is after this, is after this. We need to set up cities that are successional. Our codes and our ideas don't work that way. And this is Portland, and you can see the single story, and you can see the three-story walk-ups. And the statistics are killer statistics. You never have to be denser than this. You really don't. And all the parking, or most of it, is on the street, and the buildings are so cheap because they're not on top of each other. That building here is like a CVS, and it can be built at $75 a square foot. You put the apartment building on top, and you're in the $13 million throw of the dice. And the lessons are right there, being used right now. This isn't out of date. It's just that we've forgotten them. So the lesson of Portland and the lesson of Salt Lake City both span the new urbanism. By the way, we're already seeing, this is Arquitectónica, the wild, glamorous American firm. That's their office. Their office is actually completely austere. It's one of the first buildings of the 21st century. They have not stopped being avant-garde by going backwards. In fact, doing frivolous, showy things is precisely to not be avant-garde. This is the avant-garde firm. Look at what it's doing now. And of course, the developers love it. The developers recognize these are my kind of people. A two-story building without parking. We have allies that we discarded, we need to recover, because actually they were right, like the everyday urbanists. They need to become front and center. to help us write the pink codes. We have to engage the academy, which Emily is doing relentlessly, and she's like a junkyard dog in this. She doesn't let go of the ankle. And there's another book coming out, which is at the highest intellectual level, which is the book on the transect. But here's one thing about education. What would it be? Can anybody really graduate with $200,000 or $100,000 in debt and still be taught by the new urbanists? The model that's crashing next are the architecture schools. It's crashing. Okay, you can see the train, the light of the train coming at them. We have to be there to catch it. Okay? If we get an apprenticeship system, I'd really like this to be a new urbanist initiative, to get the firms, to have this should be a college banner to be hung on a dorm. How would you like to be an architect and have that on your dorm? Okay, those firms. And frankly, I hire people that have come from those firms. I don't hire people that come from colleges. I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to college. What I care about is that they came from UDA or that they came from Doug's office. What counts are the firms. And we interchange personnel because we actually mean something, because we teach the stuff that's necessary. The education initiative shouldn't be trying to nudge those schools. We're in full retreat in those schools. It's to bypass the schools. Okay? We are. And we can self-certify, and people will hire our people. We'll hire our graduates with more certainty about their competence than you can actually hire an architecture school graduate. These are pictures of ourselves as tactical urbanists in our time. This is the seaside charrette. Now, what we did there was design a whole new town. You know what they do now is now they actually design a cafe on a little platform. The reason is the bureaucracy. Young people could act. We need to do that. That has got to be our principal agenda. We need to break down the walls, set up the protocols, so that next gen can actually be empowered, to act. And I believe that's, light codes. Yes, there's evidence that it works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, by the way, the new urbanism, as the Congress itself, needs to lighten up a bit, too. Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry, but I do what I do.
You have your own group.